the four zone model for professional learning. So I'd love for you to take some time to kind of break that down for us and how that all comes about.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, if we return back to that idea of who are the gatekeepers, right? And for districts where we're not going towards the idea of universal screening, right? The first people who are giving some kind of recommendation to who are we going to nominate to take the test or be screened for the gifted program are generally the classroom teachers. Even when we're going into things like universal screening, classroom teachers still often fill out some kind of rating scale. Now, going back to that creativity piece, there are rating scales that focus on creative aspects in terms of arts or music and that kind of thing. So there are rating scales for that. But again, we're relying on teachers' thoughts and teachers' opinions. And as we know, there are levels of both explicit and implicit bias that exist in all of us. We obviously we work on all the time. A lot of us we work on our explicit bias, but not all of us as educators, as people, are necessarily aware of our levels of implicit bias. So there's different trainings, that we've gone through. Some of us we read books and that kind of thing, and so some of us are more aware of this kind of topic of implicit bias, and so we may have worked on sort of this topic a little bit more within ourselves, and so there are different levels of awareness that people have in terms of their implicit bias and what they've worked on in sort of terms of educating themselves and trying to work on that. And so, again, the same author as this book that I mentioned before, Dr. Katie Lewis and I created what we call the four zone equity driven professional learning model. And it started as a theoretical model. We've been working on this model, oh my, like 15 years maybe. And we base it in a couple of theoretical frameworks, and it's based in culturally responsive professional learning and equity literacy and funds of knowledge. So, looking at all of these different frameworks together. And so, based on those research frameworks, we have four different zones of going through aspects of professional learning. And then after we created the theoretical framework, we actually put it into play in different districts or even statewide, and did research-based university collaboration studies in order to put the model basically to the test, and looked at how effective it was. And so the four different zones is first increasing educators' understanding of cultural norms and equity. And it's kind of funny because then when I looked at your book chapters, I'm like, oh, Sheldon's right there with us. The second zone is increasing educators' understanding of the characteristics of gifted marginalized students. The third zone is increasing classroom support for educators and gifted marginalized students. And then the fourth zone is increasing and developing authentic partnerships with parents and community. And so these are the four parts of the professional learning model that we go through with faculty, staff, administrators. And it's an iterative process. So it's not that once you've done one zone, you never go back. Sometimes you have to go back, you touch base, you go back, you forward, and you go through. You might be on zone 3 and you sort of recognize you're touching base. You're like, oh, I'm going to go back to zone 1 a little bit. We didn't get as far along on that as we thought. And so you kind of definitely have that sort of back and forth motion within the zones. But understanding that each of those components is really integral. You have to make those authentic relationships with the community, with the parents, and understand everyone's perceptions and everyone's thoughts within, like I said, not just the parents, but within the community, and understand how that place really impacts the students. You need to support the students and the educators, not just prior to identification, but after, in order to make sure students are retained. So provide some front loading beforehand, provide support after, and make sure they have the resources and support to make sure students are able to stay. And part of that is making sure the program has that internal consistency. And so all of those kind of work together. And what we see is first that change in educators' perceptions, and then it adds to increased numbers in the gifted program, particularly of historically marginalized students, and then retention in those numbers.
So not just increasing the recruitment piece, but also the retention piece as
Right.
well.
We always want to look at the retention, not just recruitment. And part of the big piece of that retention is those zones 3 and 4. If you're not really creating authentic partnerships within the community, if you're not providing that support in the classroom, linguistic justice is a huge part of that. You know, if you're not accepting work that is responsive to students' language, saying, oh no, I only accept real English, right? In this class, right? If that's your game, that's not going to work.
You shouldn't be in the classroom if that's your response on the way.
Yeah. So, you know, and so it's part of that. Like, you need to get out of that mindset. There is no real English, right? That doesn't exist. Right? Let's toss that mindset completely.
That's horrible. Who says that? Oh my gosh.
Surprised.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So I like the fact that you said linguistic, because I've seen that where like our kids who like English is not their first language, they don't get into these gifted and talented programs. It's not because of their intellect at all. It's literally because of their language. And to me, that's looked at as a barrier. Yet they speak 3-4 languages, yet they can't get into these programs. So talk a little bit more about that. I'm just curious as far as what you're seeing about the linguistic. You said linguistic justice. Tell us a little bit more about that.
I mean, really, when you're looking at a student that, as you said, is speaking 3 languages, how is that automatically not like a lightning bolt on, you know, showing off? But there are, when we look at different characteristics, and that's part of zone 2, is looking at, okay, multilingual students and saying, what are characteristics specifically of multilingual students? The ability to go back and forth between languages, the ability to have a foot in both worlds culturally and be able to understand and switch back and forth. Those are characteristics of giftedness of multilingual students, like just that ability. So I don't know if you've ever read Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime. It's fantastic. But the maybe you've seen him on The Daily Show when it was around, but in his book, he talks about sort of the ability to switch back and forth between some of the different South African languages. Gifted right there, like just his ability to do that. And hopefully we're moving away from this idea of code switching, but into this idea of just sort of being translingual and just sort of being able to, you know, move and be able to float between and have this ability. That is a characteristic of giftedness, right? And just being able to do this. And I mean, just the way Trevor Noah talks about it is just beautiful in his book. His entrepreneurial skills, speaking of giftedness, what he did in his book, he, you know, flipped snacks. He started at the beginning of the line, got the snacks, and then would sell them to the people at the end of the line, because you only got the good snacks if you raced out of his class and got the good snacks at the front of the line. And then he would flip and make a profit and sell them to the kids at the end of the line. Entrepreneurial skills, gifted. But is that seen on a checklist of gifted behaviors? Probably not. You need to be looking at skills and these characteristics in a different way, because they're not going to be on these checklists, right? And so that's what we learn about in zone is thinking about things in different ways and really looking at individual students and how culture and ethnicity show characteristics in different ways, in particular, without using words like typical characteristics or normal characteristics and different, because I don't like that. There's no typical, and that doesn't make other people different or atypical.
Right.
It's all characteristics, and we need to recognize that all of these kids are gifted, and some aren't typical and others aren't atypical, but these are characteristics that some are seen and others are seen in populations, but I don't like typical and atypical. That just increases the otherness of marginalized communities.
Okay, this is good stuff. I'm curious now. If I want to get I know the 4-zone model is in your book, is there I guess an image that I could find somewhere if I wanted to kind of just do a quick look?
There's also an article in the Roper Review. But if you are not at a university and don't have that access behind the paywall, I completely understand. And actually scrolling on the bottom of the screen is my website. And so we can't put the actual article on the website due to the copyright violations. But what I can do is provide the last, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but the accepted version or the last submitted version prior to the publication. So I have all of the work that I'm legally allowed to provide publicly on my website. And so if you go to my website, everything that I am allowed to provide is actually there. And so it may be linked to the Ed Archive as a preprint, or it may be posted there. So for example, I have a open access chapter on gifted critical race theory that is open access. So I'm allowed to post direct link to the chapter. So that one is just posted, whereas something like that particular chapter, is scrolled a little bit further down, and it's a preprint link. So you have to go up to the top and click on publications. And then scroll down and you'll see the title is A Methodological Approach to Designing a Theory, the Journey of the 4-Zone Professional Learning Model. Right there. And then just click to the preprint. Yep. And then you can get to it right there. So on each of those, there's just some way to access. The only thing so right there is a quick description of the 4. That's actually the original 4 zones.
Okay.
And then if you scroll down a little bit more, that's the current 4 zones.
This is the current one? Got you. And I just dropped the link in the say what?
This was the journey. And so we talked about how it went from how we originally designed it to what it is now, and the research that we put into it.
And I dropped the link to this. If folks want to follow this, I dropped the link in the comments there. So you can just click on that and that'll take you directly. But of course, go to Dr. Novak's website and you can get not just this, but you can also get all of her information there as well. So thank you for that. Because I was curious, I was like, I want to I'm visual, so it's like, okay, I hear how you explain it. Sounded awesome. I'm like, but can I see this? So I'm glad that this is available as well.
Now I try to provide as much as I can to an open audience, understanding that not everyone has access to things behind the paywall, which is why I link as much as I can to my website. There's only a few things that I can't link to, and that's the things that are in the chapters in books, because those generally you're not allowed to put the preprints up. So those are the only things that I don't have linked.
That's fine. I think this is great. Okay, so I'll be honest. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation, and you taught me a lot, and I hope that our audience has had an opportunity to learn as well. I'd love for you to share your final thoughts with us.
Really, the final thoughts are just that all students have the right to learn every day. That includes gifted children, and that gifted children are gifted 100% of the day, not just when they're being pulled out into gifted classrooms. And so as we sort of center and think about our work in gifted children, just to sort of keep that in mind, that we have these gifted babies in our classroom, and these gifted babies are across all economic profiles, across all ethnic profiles, and they likely exist in characteristics that are not what are on those checklists that you typically see. And so just sort of keep an eye out, because there's babies in your classroom that are crying out for support and challenge and extension. And it may be with behaviors that are frustrating to you, because that's how they know to cry out. But sometimes that's what they're crying out for, is challenge and support. Just love on them.
Yeah. They're telling you a story. They're telling you something, right?
They're telling you something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Megan says, watching tonight as a parent, advocate, and kindergarten teacher, continually learning to better disrupt deficit narratives that are apparent in our schools. Appreciate y'all. Thank you very much, Megan. Thanks for hanging out with us. If we have some folks, Angela, that want to connect with you, what's the best way to reach you online?
My email is connected to the website, so you should be able to click there and chat with me via email. And so that would be great. You can connect either through my website or through the email that I think that's listed on my website, or I can put my email in the chat box if that's fine. I don't know if I can type in the chat box or if it's with you.
You can tell us what it is.
Okay. It's ANGEBRUN @gmail.com. You can also reach out on Twitter. I'm at Angela M. Novak, and there's an underscore in between the M and the Novak on Twitter.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Novak. It has truly been a pleasure. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Well, folks, another episode is in the books. I learned a lot about gifted and talented programs. Twice exceptional. You can have students that have an IEP and also be in our gifted and talented programs as well. Or you could be thrice exceptional. These are some really good concepts that I learned. And then in addition to the 4-zone model for professional, I think this information is very important. I think it's very powerful. Obviously, there's a lot more research that needs to happen in regards to our gifted and talented programs. But, just listen back and watch this episode again. I hope you were taking notes as well, because, again, this to me is really, really pertinent information. Remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.: if you can't fly, then run. If you can't run, then walk. If you can't walk, then crawl. But by all means, keep moving. Let's continue to be a voice in leading equity.